Hi, welcome back to the Talent Lab. I'm your host, Brad McMillan with RPM Research, and I'm joined today by my colleague, as ever, Marina Hart, and our guest, Aaron Schieving. Today's focus is going to be on hiring sales talent, and can you quantify that? So,
That's right.
sales professionals are trained communicators. They know how to build rapport. They know how to position themselves. So, how do you know if you're hiring capability or just confidence?
That's right. As we've said before on the show, interviews and hiring really shouldn't be about vibes. And nowhere is it more true than in commercial hiring. So today we brought on somebody who truly knows how to build a structure into hiring process to reduce subjectivity.
Right. And Aaron has spent more than 20 years building commercial organizations in biotech and life sciences, owning go to market strategy, pricing, CRM, compensation models, and full P&L responsibility. So, Aaron, before we get into your framework again,
Yeah.
give our audience some context. So, what kind of teams have you built and in what environments?
Yeah, no, more than happy to, and really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you. I've listened to the first few episodes and thought they were fantastic. Thought they very much aligned with the structured, kind of analytical approach that I put in place to remove a lot of subjectivity from the hiring process. But to answer your question, Brad, I mean, essentially, I've been in and around the life science industry in all different aspects of the business for a long time now, as you said, working in everything from medical device to pharma and biopharma, cell and gene therapy, tissue processing, diagnostics, you kind of name it at one point in time or another. I've been fortunate to be involved in that and to help a lot of different companies in the industry to get their products to market, which ultimately go on to help and enhance the lives of millions of people around the world. So, very fortunate to be where I'm sitting, and very fortunate to have been able to build out these commercial teams from basically the ground up at a lot of these companies.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, as you were on that journey, were you mostly inheriting teams or building from scratch? I feel there's a specific inherent difference between hiring for CROs and a product life science company or capital equipment. So, what can you say to that and building teams versus inheriting teams?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. I've been at companies where
Mhm.
I am the first commercial employee and building things out from the ground up. Other companies I've come in after there is somewhat of a commercial structure in place that may not be delivering the results that the company's looking for. Hence why they're talking to me and bringing me in. So yeah, it is a very different process in regards to how you build. I do think that they're actually very similar, in my opinion, because ultimately, whether there's a team or not, you have to make sure that what's in place, that foundation, is going to allow the team to be successful, to get to the next level, to deliver the results that ultimately you're looking to achieve. So whether that's in place and you have to maybe modify it, tweak it, change it a little bit, or whether you're building it from scratch. I mean, it's kind of the same approach, just looking at it through a slightly different lens, if that makes sense.
No, it
That makes
does.
perfect. Sorry, go ahead, Brett. I was actually going to jump in and say that. So, in your opinion, or just throughout
Mhm.
your career, whether you're building teams or inheriting them, you mentioned structure is important, process is
Yes.
important. So, not to put you on the spot, but what would be the hiring mistake that could be made in commercial leadership, whether you have an inherited team or starting from scratch and building? Give us an example.
Yeah, and for that, I mean, I can honestly go back and give you some of my personal experience going back to early in my
Okay.
career, where essentially I was tasked with growing out these commercial organizations. And as a new leader, uh, I didn't know what I was doing, to be completely honest with you, and was really had
None of
to
us do.
kind of just work my way through the process to learn on the fly. And at that point, some of the sales hires that I made weren't great. And it became very painful, especially after bringing them on board. And with the life science industry, it's selling into a very highly regulated market, which doesn't happen overnight. So there's definitely a lead time from when these individuals come in to when they can actually start to generate revenue for the company. So getting that wrong delays that process of bringing in that additional revenue. Because if ultimately, if they're not able to do that, you're not going to find out until a few months into the process. And then if you have to go and repeat it, bring someone else in, then you're just delaying things out. So, like I said, I experienced it from firsthand when I was in early in my career, and yeah, it can be painful.
When you're hiring for those different teams, for a services sales team versus a product sales team, or even potentially in med device, you talked about different sales cycles. Do you look for different talent or different key indicators, based on the product or service that you're representing?
I do not actually, and I'll explain that because ultimately, and over the 20 years that I've been doing this, I'm very analytical. So whether I realized it or not, at one point in time, I started putting pen to paper and essentially trying to figure out how to take the sales model that I had personally used and was successful with, trying to take that, bottle it so that I could give it to these reps that I was hiring and ultimately train and teach them how to transition that. And that model, it's actually based more on helping people, on helping them rather than selling to them, as I firmly believe that if I'm able to come into a situation and leave it better as a result of my involvement, the revenue will follow every single time with that. And not only that, the next time that the customer has an issue, you're going to be the first person that they pick up that phone and call as a result of you helping them through the situation. So with that approach and that focus, it doesn't matter if you're selling a product or a service, because sometimes you may be talking to them about a product that may require some additional services to be added to it, or vice versa. So, from the approach that I use, whether it's a product or a service really doesn't matter. But there are absolutely key elements to what I look for in candidates to work within this model, as it is not a model that obviously everyone is familiar with and used to. So, yeah, absolutely key elements that are a primary focus.
Yeah, and
Sure.
and we'll we'll talk a little bit more about your model too in greater detail. I just remember in my recruiting days, my early recruiting days, similar to yours, I absolutely hated interviewing salespeople because,
Yeah.
I mean, if we really think about it, salespeople are good at what? Selling themselves more than anything else, right? So for
Yep.
me, it was really difficult to figure out what do you determine if we're not looking at the numbers, and we may or may not be able to check those based on their experience, right? So we would look at other determining factors, whether it's some accomplishments or maybe what schools they went to.
Mm.
So from your leadership career, whether it's early or now, were you hiring for like pedigree on the resume, or were you hiring based on the business plan, or as you mentioned, on some criteria of how this person is going to be helping people?
Yeah, and early on in my career, honestly, I was probably winging it a lot more than I should have been. It took hiring a lot of individuals for those various roles, whether it be business development managers, account managers, sales reps. I mean, you kind of name it, customer service individuals. It took me, as I said, bringing in some of those individuals that unfortunately didn't work out. Some did, but some didn't. So, really, that's what forced me at one point in time, and this was a long time ago, to sit down and to actually reflect and look at that process to figure out how I could increase my success rate. And with that, and actually just going through that exercise, it allowed me to really standardize the process, and in doing so, I also built out some other tools that have helped me to do that, to remove some of that subjectivity from the interview process, to really allow me to compare and contrast candidates better. And through that process and building all of this out, it's actually allowed me to greatly improve that success rate that I had when I first started, when it comes to hiring the right and the ideal candidate for the company, for the team, for the role, for everything, so that everyone, myself, the company, the employee, everyone's successful in that situation. So, yeah, it definitely learned a lot. And like I say, the biggest value was taking that step back to look at the process that I'd put in place to realize that it
Mhm.
wasn't working, and then figuring out how to make sure that it did.
Sure, sure. So, for some of the biotech executives listening,
Mm.
why would you say hiring commercial talent in our industry is uniquely risky compared to other sectors? And, what would you say in relation to products technology companies as opposed to custom service based companies? So what's the risk in a mishire here?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is financial for the company. I mean, these are your frontline employees who are responsible for achieving the growth targets that the company sets. And as I mentioned a minute ago, if you get that hiring process wrong and have to go through the onboarding, have to go through the training, have to go through that lead up to when that employee is actually going to start to generate revenue for the first time, given selling into the highly regulated life science industry, if you get that wrong throughout that entire time frame, you're not bringing in revenue that's going to go towards the company goal. So having to repeat that process multiple times, I mean, some of the sales cycles when you're talking to these regulated companies can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So it's very important that you get that hire right in the first place to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success to achieve those growth targets that these companies are setting. And I mean, revenue is a huge indicator for every company. So with these sales individuals being such frontline and key figures for it, like I say, it's absolutely vital you get that hiring right the first time.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, for that example, it kind of brings me back to your skills assessment. You've
Ah,
mentioned a little bit as to why you built it, really essentially hiring for skills and potential, not vibes.
mm,
We've covered in a different episode specific measurable tools for hiring teams to use as evidence-based decision making. So was that similar to your thinking when you created the skills assessment? Maybe tell us a little bit more about your book as well.
yeah, no, happy to. And Marina, I think you hit the nail on the head a minute ago when you were talking about salespeople being trained to sell. And if you think about it, an interview is someone selling themselves. So really, when I looked at things, I wasn't able to get to the core of who these candidates that I was interviewing was. It, it was a byproduct of the questions I was asking and just the fact that they were showing up and they were putting their salesman skills on show. So there was a lot of gamesmanship. And like I said, I was really trying to come up with a way to wade through that, and in doing so, I did build a sales skill set assessment, as you mentioned. And it is actually something that's going to be featured in my newest book that is slated to come out Tuesday, the 24th of March. It's called Beyond Infinite Positivity. It's the sequel to
Awesome.
the first book, Infinite Positivity, that I published back in 2024. And it captures the sales model that I've been talking about. But this sales skill set assessment, essentially what happened with it is one day I sat down with pen and paper and my goal was to come up with a criteria that I could look at and put these candidates through that would give me, okay, yes, this person has the sales skills that I'm looking for. This one doesn't. Now, I tried to start out by putting together a list of all of the traits and skills that could make someone great at sales. But by the end of the day, I had pages upon pages of these traits because what makes one person great at sales doesn't necessarily make the next person great at sales. So
Makes
that didn't
sense.
work at all. So after sitting there scratching my head for a minute, I decided to actually look at the adverse and I flipped it around and I said, okay, well, what are some of the things that could potentially prevent someone from being successful in a sales role? And that
Mhm.
list came out much, much shorter. And after some grouping and massaging it a little bit, I actually came up and settled on 5 potential weaknesses that a candidate could have that would ultimately prevent them from being successful or minimize their success when it comes to sales. And essentially, then just being the analytical person that I am, I built the assessment around those 5 weaknesses and put it in place. And I've been using it for probably at least the last decade. And it has been a very valuable tool for me to make sure that I'm getting those hirings right the first time.
I want to challenge something that I've heard is, maybe conventional wisdom in other sales or, other areas.
Mm,
You flip the question from, what makes someone great to what prevents someone from succeeding. So this
Mhm.
is a philosophy similar to what's used in sports, which is why we often see talk of hiring former college athletes or people with sports background as they're accustomed to working through failure. A baseball player that, hits the ball 30% of the time is an amazing baseball player. So have you seen that in your hiring succeed or fail? And how do you balance that with finding salespeople that need to have a strong technical acumen in the life sciences, whether they're, representing complex product or services and interacting with PhD scientists?
Yeah, no, great question, and something that has definitely been around for, I don't know, as long as I've been aware of it. So, yes, there are a
Yep.
significant number of individuals who are in hiring roles that do think when it comes to sales, you want that former athlete. They're competitive. They, as you mentioned, Brad, they've gone through and they've had to experience failure because no one's going to win every single game that they play. No one's going to hit every ball. I mean, I myself am a former soccer player, and that was my life. It's my son's life. Um, you're never going to win everything, but every time you lose, you get back up. You fight. You go through the process. So I do think that there is some alignment with sales. However, I do not actually agree that you want to go out and just find someone who's played sports and bring them in because that really does not do anything to their skill set. And one of the weaknesses, and I know we'll get into it in a minute, is limited self belief.
Mhm.
Now, odds are those athletes probably don't have a limited self belief because they've had to learn how to pick themselves up, dust themselves off. But that doesn't mean that they're automatically covering all of the other areas that they need to be strong in. So it is an element and something to consider, but definitely not the end all be all as far as I'm concerned.
I'm going to majorly channel Ted Lasso here. Football is life, right? And infinite
Yes, it is.
positivity. Um, but I'm going to, Brett mentioned something along the lines of measuring the fields and proper tools. Brett, I'm going to kick it back to you because you had a great analogy that kind of goes with the whole sports thematic.
Right, right. So I think it's about having the right tool and the right ability to understand how to use that tool. So it could be a little bit more challenging, but you could measure 100-yard football field with a 9-inch ruler. It might be something a little bit different, but it's about shaping the right tool and having the right understanding. What would be your thoughts on that and sort of relevancy?
And it is a tool. And with the assessment, it is only a portion of the interview process. I mean, there is stuff that goes on well before it to make sure that I'm using another tool that I've created called the ticket that really outlines everything that I'm looking for in the ideal candidate, that needle in a haystack, if you will. I don't even start talking to people or posting a job or recruiting for a job until that ticket is built out and I know exactly what I'm looking for. Am I going to find that? Probably not, but I will find something that's as someone who's as close as possible to that ticket. And then I can make contact with them. And then from the process from there, I mean, it entails usually setting up a quick 30-minute conversation, not an interview, but a conversation with this candidate to tell them about the company, tell them about the role, tell them about what I'm looking for, and give them a taste of who I am as the hiring manager. Because ultimately, we're going to be working to get very closely together. And really, my goal in that is at the end of that 30-minute call, they should have a pretty good understanding if they align with what I'm looking for. If they do, fantastic. We move on. If they don't, that's more than fine. We just saved each other a lot of time from having to then go into the interview process. So it really isn't even until I get into what follows that 30-minute conversation where it's the actual formal interview that that assessment comes into play. And even in that uh, formal interview, I typically break it down into three different segments. The first segment is the assessment that I walk them through live. The second portion, I put them through some pre prepared questions that I have for them. And with those questions, I do want to specify that they're usually not about the candidate's background. I mean, I have their resume. That's why I started talking to them in the first place. So there may be something that I want to clarify about their background or what they've done, but if their resume does a good job, it speaks to that. What I want to ask them about and what I want to learn about in this portion of the interview is who they are. What motivates them? What are their career aspirations? How do they like to be managed? What do they expect of others? And how do they just approach things in general? So lots of open-ended questions to get them talking, to get them to share examples from their past. Um, and then the last portion of that interview, it's their time. And I make it very clear to them that the process is just as much about me getting to know them as it is them getting to know me. Because again, we're going to be working very closely together. So they should have the ability to ask any and all questions they want. I'll be a complete open book. Talk to them about anything and everything that I can to make sure that, again, both of us know what we're getting into. We're on the same page. We're aligned from day one before they even come into the process. So there's other stuff that follows after that. But like I say, it's not just this one tool. There's multiple tools, multiple steps, multiple kind of conversations, interviews
Yeah.
that together make up the process that ultimately allow me to boast a pretty successful and pretty happy hire rate, if that makes sense.
No,
Makes
no, it
perfect
does.
sense. Yeah. You
And,
probably saw. Sorry. Sorry. It just, I think we were both so excited and nodding to every single thing you were saying, Aaron, because that is literally our philosophy. We keep talking about the fact that before the posting hits the internet, before the job description is even put together, we always
Mhm.
encourage our hiring managers to go on this, I don't know, a miniature walkabout about the role, right? And really understand what they need out of the candidate, what this role
Yep.
entails. And we talk about this in other podcasts, so I don't want to take time away from this one. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly the philosophy. A little bit of preparation now in the front is going to make the process much easier, simpler, and frankly more efficient for both the hiring manager and the candidate later. So sorry I jumped in, Brent. Go ahead.
Agreed.
no, and it,
Sorry.
well,
I was just going to say to that
I
point,
was
real
going to
quick,
say
if
when,
I may. Sorry, we're talking over each
go
other,
for it.
Brad. Apologies for that. But to that point, Marina, I mean, if you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to find it? So
Yeah.
again, that's where the structure comes into play. And I think it may actually come from my sales background and experience because ultimately I've had to target customers my entire life that I can actually find that fit the product and fit the services that I can actually help, as I mentioned. So if I'm not focused on that and a target, anywhere wins, right? So
No, absolutely right. And hiring is a project, and as we know from some of the project management, we look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
yep,
But I think you approached the weaknesses in a very different way, and you shared your book with us, which we had a chance to review. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so you outlined the five core sales weaknesses. So
yep.
need for approval, emotional involvement, money weaknesses, self-limiting beliefs, and buy cycle. So let's unpack them really quick.
Yeah, no, happy to. So we can start with the first one, which is, as you mentioned, having a high need for approval. Now, this typically manifests itself by the candidate or the individual struggling to ask tough questions, like for the sale, due to really having a high need to be liked and or loved. Now, I usually tell individuals that this need, they're usually great at opening doors, but not so much walking through them. So people will love to talk to them, but at the same time, if they're not pushing, if they're not trying to get that thing to the next level, due to that need to be liked and in some extreme cases loved, they're usually probably not pushing to earn the business. Really the
Aaron,
impact from
I'm
this.
gonna, sorry,
No,
sorry to jump in. I was gonna put you right on the spot because Brad and I both took the assessment, and
okay,
with every weakness that you were talking about, I'm like, I'm gonna give you our scores, and you will tell us what they mean. Are you okay with that? Was
yeah,
that
no,
too much of an on
absolutely,
spot for you? Okay. All right. So
absolutely,
mine was for need of approval. Mine was 9 out of 25, and Brad's was 10 out of 25. So pretty
nice.
close.
All right, so let me run it through the calculator real quick. Bear me 2 seconds here.
You knew we were going to put you on a spot, didn't you? Okay.
All right. So 9 out of 25,
Hmm.
you actually have a very low need for approval, Marina, which
Sounds
is a
about
good thing.
right.
Um, so I would consider, based on your score, that again, low risk from that standpoint. And Brad, what was yours? I'm sorry.
His
Slightly more with 10. So,
10. So
40% versus
40%.
36%.
okay, so 40 based on the key and based on the number of individuals that I've ran through this assessment does actually bump up into to medium. It's a very low medium, but there is a slight change once you do get above the 39%. So 39% and
Interesting.
lower is low risk for it. 40 to 60 is medium risk, and then anything 61 or above is usually high risk for it. So you're both pretty. I mean, wouldn't have any issues with that whatsoever based on that assessment result from that one for either of you. Um, and the other thing that I'll share at this point in time as well, and I make sure to tell the employees or the candidates this when we're going through it, is that although I am asking and I am looking at these weaknesses, they're not rule out criteria. So
Oh,
just
good.
because, say, someone did pop up with a high need for approval, and when I'm going through and asking the questions, I don't know until I actually calculate the results at the end of it, because it's a rapid fire kind of lightning round questioning, if you will. Um, but the reason why I say it's not rule out is if I did know. So, say, just for an example, Brad, you had a very high need for approval. Okay, that doesn't mean you can't be successful at selling. It means you need to get that
Hmm.
approval from somewhere else. So, me as your manager, I may try and make sure that you get that from me, from the team, from the higher ups in the organization, from the company itself, so that we can keep you having the approval that you need to make sure that you're feeling satisfied and fulfilled. So, you're not trying to get that from your customers. So again, these allow me to also understand the employee and how I may need to manage each one a little bit differently to make sure that they're successful. Now, if they
I
come
love
back and
that.
there's weaknesses across all of them, that's probably a lot to manage and to train and to work through. But one, two, and depending on how what the actual risk percentage is based on the assessment, yeah, not an issue whatsoever.
Yeah, before Brad jumps into the next, the emotional
Yeah.
involvement section, I kind of wanted to mention that I think a lot of times we forget that when we're talking about relationships,
Mhm.
like in selling, right, in commercial selling or in kind of selling, we're really not talking just about the relationships between us as a salesperson and our external clients.
Yeah.
Those relationships, as such, that need for validation or approval, can also come from internal teams, from collaborative
Yes.
approach to selling, from the relationship between mentoring and management. And so just wanted to mention that again, sales is about relationships, but they're not only external, they're also internal ones.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's again why I approach it the way that I do is because, like I say, I can provide them that and I can ensure they get it internally, whether it's working with me or whether I can get them set up with a mentor or is more focused on working as a team collective. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I've structured this the way that I've structured it.
That's cool. No, fantastic. And then, we were both, somewhat similar in emotional involvement. So
Okay.
I scored 13, which was at about 52%, and Marina scored 14, which was about 56% related to emotional involvement.
Okay.
So where does emotional involvement start to impair decision making in long sales cycles?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, based on that key that I shared, you'd both be kind of medium risk on that one. So nothing that can't be overcome or anything like that. But typically, the way that I explain this one is that relationships at their core, they are built on conflict. And sometimes being too close to the customer may actually prevent the ability to gather all the necessary information. So oftentimes, in my opinion, no conflict means that there's probably not the level of rapport with the customer. And ultimately, I think a lot of that comes down to it's actually really important to be respected and not liked. If a customer merely likes you and something goes wrong, you may not get another opportunity. But if they respect you, it's a different story altogether. And it is a different level of relationship building to go through those two different things. So with this one in particular, I mean, it usually comes down to something where I'd say, okay, hey, I've worked with John for years. John's my friend. He's got me. He's going to buy from me. So I may not push John. I may not challenge John. I may not ask John all the appropriate questions up front to truly understand what John's needs are. So that's why, like I say, because I think that, hey, we're friends, I'm emotionally involved here, we're good. John may not think that. John may actually be disappointed that I didn't ask him all those questions. He may think that, okay, Aaron's not pushing me to actually figure out what this entails, how he can set me up for success. So with this, I mean, it really comes down to, in my opinion, kind of a lack of preparation. Which
Mm,
in the sales process, again, it's all about direction and focus based on your target customers base and whatnot. So this emotionally involved one, I think, can absolutely get in the way of people being successful in the role.
makes sense. Your third weakness is money weakness, and Brett and I chatted a little
Yeah.
bit about this. Our scores are again pretty close at 12 and 13, or 48 and 52% respectively.
Mhm.
But we kind of felt like it almost takes on a slightly different tone because sales reps don't typically control pricing, right? So when we're talking about money weakness, what is it there for? What exactly are you assessing with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the third one is money weakness, as you said. And from a young age, we're all taught that it's impolite to talk about money in social settings. Well, in sales, we talk about money every single hour of every single day. So even if it's not
Yeah.
about setting price, it's negotiating that price, it's quoting, it's talking to the customer about their budget. It's really getting into the nitty gritty of the details. And if people have a money weakness, it can lead to really not asking
Mm,
about budgets or getting real numbers and just sending quotes, which, hey, their sales number, their quote numbers are probably going to be fantastic. However, what then happens if those quotes aren't based in reality because they didn't actually have those conversations up front? What happens if the sales rep then has to negotiate with the customer and
I see.
understand, okay, well, from my company's standpoint, need to make sure I maintain this margin or this percentage of growth versus this, and the customer's asking me. The other way that this also comes up as well is that everyone has a different perspective of what constitutes a lot. So for some, if they think a lot is a few dollars, well, then they're going to have a very hard time having conversations with someone that is talking
Yeah.
about $1 million transaction and vice versa. So again, it's kind of just aligning that. And you may have also picked up with the questions as you went through them that I do ask these ones a little bit different and it's very intentional. So these
Right.
questions I actually get more pushback on than anyone else or any of the other
Interesting.
weaknesses. And if you look at them, you see that the money questions, they pertain mostly to friends and family. And again, the
Mhm.
actual questions, the whole entire assessment is included in the book. So everyone can have access to that shortly here. Um, but I intentionally use those kind of friends and family as if those are harder conversations than to have with a customer. So if you can have those conversations or even any level of conversations about those with friends and family, the sales stuff we talk about every day, I mean, it's a piece of cake. So again, those ones are intentionally taken to kind of an nth degree so that I can really assess their comfort level with really just financial intelligence.
Hmm. Gonna challenge you a little bit on that from a mentality perspective of a salesperson when they're interacting with customers.
Mhm.
Cost versus value, price versus value. How
Yep.
does that take an impact into this score and this area of conversation?
I mean, that is obviously a big part of sales, of business development, is basically articulating the value of your products to justify the associated costs. So can it play an element into this? Yes, but honestly, that one I think would actually play more into the need for approval. and even the emotionally involved one. Because a lot of the time, it's in those initial kind of discovery calls where you are articulating that value, where you are telling the customer how you can help them and what you're building out. Because I do think that the majority of sales are earned in that initial process, not in the end process. You may have to tweak some of the numbers or something to align with the budget, something like that. But again, I think most sales are earned in that initial stage, not the back end. So, like I say, I do think what you're talking about is valid, Brad, and it's a crucial part of the sales process. But I do think it fits into a different segment, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So we had a pretty big difference on this last one between
Mhm.
Marina and myself.
Yes.
So on self-limiting beliefs, so I scored 88%, where Marina scored 28%. So how would you approach either of us differently or similarly, given these scores on self-limiting beliefs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And first off, Brad, I just want to make sure, are you okay? I mean, should we talk about you? I'd like to help you considering that that's a high risk self belief number.
Oh
So
my goodness.
kidding, only kidding.
Yeah.
It is high. But at the same time, I mean, that one is a little bit more harder to overcome, especially in a sales role. As the way
Sure.
that I look at this one, it's the most self explanatory out of all of them. And simply put, that self doubt typically leads to limited or wrong actions, which then lead to no outcomes. Um, so with this one, and I do firmly believe that there is no other job in the world that gets told no, gets ghosted, gets ignored more than sales. So as such, I
Yeah.
think it's critical to be able to just kind of brush those off whenever they happen, not to let them affect you. You then pick up the call, you move on to your next call, your next opportunity, whatever. You have to get up, you have to move on. Um, so really, it's about getting out of your head and continuing to put in the work. So really, it's not uncommon to get multiple no's on the way to a yes, and you just can't let that
Absolutely.
discourage you in a sales role. So usually, if this one comes up, it depends on the level. But honestly, most of the sales individuals that I've put through this, they score pretty low from a risk standpoint on this one, which works out perfect. But again, my sales model is all about positivity. I have other books called My Daily Dose of Positivity as well, where it's an inspirational quote that I put and send to all of my reps on a daily basis. First thing I usually do every morning, so that they get up, they start their day with positivity, because that ultimately sets the foundation for everything that follows. So there's definitely, like I say, things that I can do to coach that one as well. But this one I think is a little bit more inherently tied to the person themselves. So results can be interesting on that one.
Well,
Sure.
before we jump into the bicycle, I kind of want to not to defend Brad, but he's actually one of the most positive people that I have met.
Yes.
So from that perspective, when we got those results, it made me kind of think like, wait, maybe his self doubt is what actually is guilting him into pushing even harder or in a
Maybe.
way. So maybe his high score was actually a positive from that perspective because he's just
Maybe.
positively just keep moving, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Like maybe I didn't do this good enough at this
Yeah.
particular minute. I will try better next time. So for me, it was almost like the reverse of that psychology of thinking like what is or what is not working. So but we have
Well,
Absolutely.
slightly different personalities. Yeah.
and sometimes it's like, okay, this sucks. I feel it sucks, but we got to do it anyways. Get through it.
Yeah.
You can be afraid or hesitant of something. You just can't be afraid or hesitant of actually doing it.
Yes.
So it
Exactly.
can make you feel
Yeah.
some way, but as long as it doesn't impact you to the level of inaction.
Yep. Absolutely. Agree completely. And that's also the beauty of this model because ultimately the assessment, like I said, it's not rule out criteria. And if I do sense that there is something, the next series part of the interview where I go in and ask them those questions, I'm going to delve into it. I'm going to try and figure out why Brad may have answered some of those questions the way that he did to figure out kind
Hmm.
of the actual level just through a conversation and question based approach
Yeah.
rather than just this kind of static assessment. So again, it all builds upon itself to be able to kind of get through that process. But yeah, absolutely right.
And so it's definitely understanding that this is not a B C D F
Hmm.
kind of grade. It's more of a tool to where showing somebody where or showing where somebody falls on a continuum rather than high is good, low is bad.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. And again, it's all coachable. It just, like I say, depends on how much needs to be coached. Ultimately depends on how much time I'm going to then have to devote to that candidate should I bring them in. So if there's a lot of risk for the different areas of the assessment and they don't have, say, the industry knowledge that I'm looking for, they don't have the industry network that's going to allow them to kind of hit the ground running, odds are that's probably not a candidate that's going to move forward. But if they have
Hmm.
most of those things, then yeah, I can focus on the areas that I need to either teach them or coach them on to make sure that they can be successful in the role.
Sure, sure. And we're moving on to the buy cycle.
Yeah.
It was interesting for me specifically because I approach the buy cycle from two perspectives, right? One is how I approach buy cycle in my personal life, but then also as a business owner, I actually approach the buy cycle differently in my business operations than I do in my personal operations. When it comes to my personal money, I'm a lot more I'm a lot more analytical. I want to grab, a lot more data, a lot more comparative. If I'm looking at a fridge, I'm going to be looking at 10 and that 10 is going to go to 8 to 6 to 4, but if it's, trying to invest in the business and we see value with it, let's run with it. It works or it doesn't. We don't have to have it forever. So it was interesting just in looking at that how conflicted I was from those two different areas.
Yeah, no, that is very interesting. And you are definitely unique in someone taking this based on your role. Because a lot of the people that I put through it, I mean, they're not business owners, they're not running an organization or anything like that. So yeah, you definitely have a different lens that I think a lot of people would see it from. Which, to be honest, I haven't explored fully just yet, since I haven't really put a whole lot of people through it. I'm going to now, so I
Brett's pitching
appreciate
some
that. But
ideas.
yeah,
Yeah, I kind of had a similar philosophy too when it comes to bicycle, and maybe it's just me being so independent. Like when I need something, I think of what I need, why I buy it, what's the risk to me not buying it versus buying it, and how that all entails. So maybe kind of managing those weaknesses is something that we can move to. So basically, I was saying that when it comes to buying for me, I think about what I want and what I need, right? So I'm not quite sure if I'm relating to the business aspect of it, to the personal aspect of it, but I buy what I need when I need it once I understand what my costs are and what is the cost of buying it and what I'm getting for it versus what is the cost of me not buying it, right? But how would you describe that or how would you talk about the bicycle to a skeptical biotech executive? Like, what does that entail?
yeah. So I think this one, unlike a lot of the other ones, actually ties into what is being sold and what the company offers. So I very much believe that the way you buy has a 100% correlation to how you sell. So that's why this buy cycle question is focused on what was the last big purchase you made? How did you do it? Because ultimately, I think that is what the individual is going to expect from their customers and how those customers will buy, which may lead to them not following up and not pushing to earn the business.
Let's see.
And that non supportive buy cycle could indicate that they may go about struggling because they may understand the stall if someone needs to think it over. But the reason why I also say that this one I think ties into what you sell more than anything else is if someone is very impulsive, they may be great at selling commodities, but an equipment sale that's going to take upwards to 9 months, a year, or a large
Yeah.
capital expenditure, they may struggle with that because they may not understand why the customer is not moving forward. Whereas someone that is used to doing a significant amount of research before they buy something personally, well, having them sell a commodity may not work out because they may want to do the research. And when customers are wanting something, they may try and slow the process down to make sure that it aligns with how they approach things. So, like I said, this one is also the most subjective of the weaknesses because it's an open-ended question that I actually send them
Yeah.
outside of the initial 20 questions that we do kind of lightning round style during the interview. I send them this question via email afterwards. Tell them, please don't spend any more than 5 minutes on it. If they do, they're overthinking it. And I want to be respectful of their time as well. Um, but then that question comes back. And again, it's open field. So this one, unlike the other
Yeah.
ones, doesn't have a numerical response. So then I look at it and I try and standardize it as much as possible based on, again, what the company I'm working at that time offers, what their buy cycle is, what their process is. And again, it's insightful to me to understand that so that I can align it with, does this make sense with what we're offering today? Does it not make sense? Can we find some middle ground with it? And ultimately, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. And as we were going, we touched on this a little bit, but as we're going over strengths, weaknesses, and the results that you're getting from there, you said weaknesses, or well, weakness in an area is not an automatic disqualification. But how do
Correct.
you decide when a weakness is manageable versus when a weakness is too risky?
Yeah, they're all manageable. Um, the question is, and I think I mentioned it a minute ago, it depends on how many of the weaknesses they show up for. So if a candidate again has a weakness in all of the areas, that's going to require a significant amount of time and
See.
attention to get them productive in the role versus if they have one, maybe two, that's a completely different story. So some are going to come in with little to no weakness, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that they don't need the same level of support from a management standpoint. They still need that management support and that coaching, that guidance, but I can then focus it in different areas for them. Whereas someone that comes in, I still am going to have to focus on the industry side of things to make sure that they've got the technology, to make sure they understand the company, the product, the voice, the messaging, all of that kind of stuff, but also then help them from making sure that we're getting them what they need internally so that they're not trying to get it from the customers so that we can minimize the impact of these potential weaknesses. And a lot of that coaching
Yeah.
comes from, I mean, I've been fortunate to, at multiple companies, build out management training programs as well, where we take the next level top talent of the company, put them through about a year-long training program to really build out their skill set, prepare them for those future leadership roles. So based on that experience, based on all the coaching and leadership I've done over the past decade or so, I mean, that's really where all of this comes into play, is kind of setting and understanding that foundation for each individual that I'm interviewing. So that then we can build on it and we can get that candidate where they need to be and productive as possible. And unfortunately, sometimes there's too much building that's required. And those are the candidates that, again, we're going to know up front. I'm going to be very candid with them. I'm going to share their assessment results with them, but
Hmm.
I'm going to tell them it probably doesn't make sense for us to move on. I'll still offer them because I've at that point probably had great conversations with them. I'll still offer to help them if I can. My network is their network as far as I'm concerned at that point. The ones that
Yeah.
are a fit for it, yeah, we're going to jump in. We're going to work very closely together. We're going to build something fun and amazing and ideally have a lot of success. So
Yeah.
hopefully that answers your question. But like I say, it really just depends on how much building it would be necessary to determine whether or not these risks, these weaknesses, play a role as to rule out criteria.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's actually a perfect segue into my next question because
Mm,
in some of our prior episodes, we discuss how the hiring managers make a determination whether this role requires somebody who is a plug and play candidate, right? Or somebody who needs to be developed. So, in your experience, when it comes to commercial sales, when is it smarter to hire capacity and coach, which obviously you have the ability to do, versus hiring somebody who kind of already fits perfectly whatever it is that you're looking for? What is that distinction?
yeah, and first off, I'll say I don't think that there is a perfect plug and play. I mean, everyone is going to have to come in and
Okay.
learn and grow and evolve, in my opinion.
That's good.
But ultimately, I also think it depends entirely on what the company, what the situation of the company is, what the company's goals are. Because ultimately, when it comes, especially to salespeople, going back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, we're talking about revenue and growth for the company. That's the fuel. That's what pays people salaries and allows the company to continue to invest in its future. So if it's a long sales cycle, then obviously you're going to want someone who does have more of the necessary traits to hit the ground running. If it's a shorter sales cycle, then you may have the luxury of finding someone who has a tremendous amount of potential, but maybe not as much experience. Well, okay, then in that situation, because the path to revenue is shorter, you have more flexibility than that. If the path to revenue is longer, then obviously it's more critical that you bring someone in that, like say, can hit the ground running, that has those skill sets, that has the industry network to be able to move things forward. So really, I think the answer to that question depends on the company, the situation, what they're facing, what their targets are. Um, and then ultimately that would be something that I would include in my ticket when I'm determining the ideal candidate, knowing well in advance that, okay, we've got a hefty revenue goal this year. I need to get someone
Yeah.
in that's going to contribute to this now versus I need to bring someone in, focus more on a 3 to 5 year goal where I'm going to train this person, I'm going to build them up, we're going to set them up for future success as we scale and grow the sales organization.
Makes sense.
Sure, sure. So now kind of shifting from, structure versus instinct. So
Yes.
Marina, you had some thoughts on this.
Well, really, like when assessment is very structured, like numeric responses, specific order, defined scoring, and Brett and I always advocate structure. That's what we talk about in a lot of our podcasts. But do you ever feel like having a rigid structure risks missing a little bit of nuance?
No, and I think that's where the beauty of this model comes into play because yes, the assessment very very structured, but the
Mhm.
other portions of it, even though it is all prescripted and there is a defined process, I mean the way that I look at it is like a roller coaster, if you will. So everyone's going to get in the car. You're going to get the safety
Yeah.
instructions. They're going to make sure your lap bar's down. Then they're going to start sending you up that long hill to get to the top, right? Well, that's much like that initial call that I'm going to have. That's the structured part. That would be the assessment as well. But then you get to the top of the hill, you peak, and everything could go. You could go left, you could go right, you could be upside down 1 second. You're all over the place. Well, that's the next portion of the interview process where I'm asking them these questions. And even though I have a list of questions that I like to ask them, I could ask them the first question and completely go off into left field on a tangent based on what they say, because I may want to understand more. I may want to dig into it. I may find it interesting. So I want to talk to them about that. So I have these questions prepared, but I never really follow the, okay, I'm going to ask you this question and then this question and then this question. It is all over the place. Like I say, that roller coaster. And then essentially at the end, you come back into the same place you started and you're getting more instructions on how to get out. They're taking the safety lap bar up. That really, I think, captures my process pretty well. Um, and I also like the fact that that middle portion where it is going left, right, upside down, twisty turns, all sorts of stuff, because it also gives me an opportunity to see what this individual is going to be like when they have a customer call, because customer calls are all over the place. Sometimes you never know what they're going
Yeah.
to need when they first call you. So it's seeing where those conversations go, seeing how they can react to it. So that part has zero structure whatsoever. It is just about flying with abandon and asking questions, getting to know them,
Mhm.
and then bringing everything back to, like I say, where you're going to get out of the roller coaster and hopefully go back and get in line again. So,
So it sounds like it is prescriptive, but is not scripted.
yes.
So where we're kind of looking at this, from a mathematical standpoint, and I think you alluded to this is, more of a continuum. But is there a weight percentage where gut instinct still matters?
Yes. I mean, like I said, the bicycle weakness, I mean, that one is subjective. but also with the conversations that follow and that random wild abandonment that I just mentioned of the roller coaster when I'm asking those questions, it's all based on how they respond to them. So yes, there is still subjectivity to this. My goal in building the assessment was to remove some of that. I don't know if it's possible to remove all of it. And Marina, to your point, I don't know if it would be beneficial to remove all of it, because I do
Yeah.
think that the beauty comes from having both sides of it to be able to have the structure and then have the wild ride over here to then compare the two to allow you to really determine fit at the end of the day. So,
Yeah.
and I will also say that after I do my interview, if this is a candidate that I think makes sense for us, I'm going to bring in a colleague of mine, usually my counterpart on the operations side of the business, have them interview the candidate. I'm going to give them all my notes. I'm going to give them the ticket. I'm going to give them the assessment results. I'm going to tell them
Hmm.
if there's additional areas that I want them to probe that I may not have gotten to during my initial call. And essentially, that is a means for me to check my math, so to speak, as well. So having
Yeah.
them, considering they know what I'm looking for in the role, interview this candidate as well. I jump on the call with them, I introduce, and then I just sit back and listen. They take the lead, they go forward with it, and everything goes from there. So again, there's other processes to kind of fact check some of it as well to try and eliminate as much of that subjectivity as possible to get down to, yeah,
Oh,
this is the person for us, if that makes sense.
Uh, No, that makes perfect sense, and I think it's important to have those guardrails. Brett and I talk about that as
Mhm.
well. If you have any other decision makers or team members or stakeholders that need to be involved in the process, identify that early on, bring them in to allow for that gut check. But gut check on their end.
Yeah.
If kind of using the same analogy, but are there ever any exceptions to the rule? Have you ever like overridden your own model based on something? Any outliers that you can speak of that would be kind of interesting to know?
I mean, I have followed the model pretty closely over the
Okay.
years. The only time I think I have ever not followed it is if I was hiring the same individual for the second time around. Um, so, for example, if I hired an individual, they went through this hiring process that I'm articulating. Um, I worked with them, and then for whatever reason, either I or they moved on to a different company and we
Hmm.
reconnected at a later time and I brought them into that new company. In those situations, I don't follow it because I already know the person. So that one
Yeah.
would take a little bit of a different approach where mainly I'm just trying to make sure that everyone else within the organization understands why I want to bring. So that one's actually probably more focused internally than it is externally with the candidate. But I think for the most part, those would be the only times where I've kind of skirted the process, if you will.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to jump in a little bit more on the transparency side.
Okay.
In my HR experience, really talking to candidates and getting their feedback after the interview process, I find it's important to share as much as I can, sort of constructive criticism, right? I have a very similar philosophy. But is it important for you to share with the candidate? Well, obviously, somebody who you will hire. But
Mhm.
what about those candidates that you choose not to move forward with? Do you share those results with them or the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I do. So actually, on the actual interview, after I asked them those lightning round 20 questions, I explain the method to my madness. So I will actually walk them through the weaknesses. I'll walk them through why I built the process. And I'll actually ask them if they now knowing these weaknesses, at least the first four, since the fifth one is the email that happens after, I'll ask them if thinking back on the what may seem like random questions that I asked them makes sense now. And you can almost see that light bulb go on above their head because they can see, oh, that's why he was asking those money questions. That's why he was asking those confidence questions. That's why he was asking the approval questions because they're all tied to the model and they understand it there. the model doesn't work, the assessment doesn't work if they know that going into it. Otherwise, they could potentially bias the assessment and the results. So
I
that's
see.
why I make sure to explain it afterwards. And it usually actually piques their interest. I mean, I don't think I've had anyone that didn't want to know what their results were going through it. So yes, whether I
Yeah.
hire them or not, after I get the bicycle question, I tabulate the results and I will absolutely
Mhm.
share it with them. Again, the model, my books, everything, it's built on helping people. So these candidates, even if I'm not going to bring them into the organization because they may not be the fit, the ideal fit that I'm looking for, I'm still going to help them. I'm going to share the assessment results with them. I'll answer any questions that I can. Um, and ultimately, if there's someone else that I know that is hiring for a role that they may be a better fit for, I'm going to make that introduction as well. So I'd rather help them than just kind of, yep, thanks for your time. We're not moving forward. So yeah, I try and relay as much feedback and information as I can, but definitely share the assessment results with them.
Well, has that always proven helpful, or has that ever backfired? And I'm just curious if potential hiring managers in potential situations
Mhm.
have the fear of rejection of the rejection. So here's the situation, and then somebody tries to quote unquote argue back. So
Yeah.
has your feedback structure, has that ever backfired on you?
A couple times in which candidates explain that they don't understand one thing or the other, or how I came to the conclusions that I came to. Which again, I try and articulate that as much as possible, but sometimes, as we've talked about, there is still some subjectivity to it, whether they just don't seem like a fit for the team or what that may. So yes, there have been times where candidates that or push back a little bit on, well, why? I don't understand. Why do we should be?
Yeah.
That's not an issue for me. So
Well, from that perspective, and Brett and I always emphasize that everything in the hiring process, from the initial reach out to how the interviews are structured, and obviously how long it takes, all of
mhm,
those aspects have a direct effect on the company's brand. So, for our biotech leaders listening, who are thinking about employer brand, company name, does transparency, or this kind of transparency that we're all talking about, protect your long term reputation, or is it something that has the potential to harm it? What are your thoughts?
yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And as someone who has been responsible for the brand and creating brands at organizations in my background, I think it helps. Because honestly, I think
What?
if you're creating a positive experience for these candidates, whether you bring them in or not, um, that helps the brand. I think
Yeah.
that even if I'm not going to bring them into the role, by spending the extra time after the interview to make sure that I share those results with them and to talk to them about that, hopefully it's something that they can learn from. Or even going through the process when I explain why I'm asking about the assessment, how it's
Mhm.
created, why I'm asking things, hopefully they're able to learn and benefit from it so that the next time they jump on an interview, they may have more insight, they may be better prepared to successfully achieve and earn that role. So I personally think it's beneficial because again, when you help people, I think that it definitely changes how they see you, and I think it becomes positive, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. And, as we had a chance to preview your book chapter, you
Huh?
were very specific and intentional about who else you bring into the interview process, when
Yeah.
you do it, and all the information you share with the other interviewer to double check your gut or your findings or your evidence,
Yep.
to see blind spots and frame questions from an operations perspective.
Yep.
So how do you manage how many people are in the interview process, and how do you interpret that feedback, and have you ever gone against some of your other feedback's recommendation? So have you ever challenged the feel from somebody else in the hiring process?
Yes, absolutely to that one. So I usually try and keep the number small, not to overwhelm the candidate and feel like that they are being picked on by a group of multiple individuals just raining questions down on them. So I try and keep it more intimate with one, two, usually three would be the max that I think I would bring into that final kind of interview to check my math process. And ultimately, like I say, I'll be on the call. So there is a familiar face since they would have had multiple interactions with me at that point. Um, I don't really get involved in the calls other than doing that initial introduction because I want to see them interact with others, and I want to basically just sit back and listen to the answers that come as well. So after that call, I'll sit down with each of my colleagues that I asked to join in on that process and obtain their feedback. Some may pose questions or put challenges out there, which is more than acceptable and what I would hope for. That's why I'm technically bringing them into the process so that they can help ensure that we're bringing the right individual into the organization. Other times they may not be like, yeah, they thought they were fantastic. They seem perfect for the role. Great. Those ones are easy. Everything moves forward pretty standard at that point. But the ones where there are objections, essentially, I do take that very serious because I, again, want their feedback. Um, Usually, once I get it, I'm going to call the candidate and have a pretty candid conversation with them where whatever those concerns were, I'm going to address them via a phone conversation with the candidate. If the candidate can help to address those concerns, then yeah, I'll move forward. If the candidate can't, well, then we may have just saved some time from bringing in the wrong individual. And again, I'm grateful for my colleagues for pointing that out. So, yes, if there is a concern, it's something that I will immediately address one on one with the candidate to figure out how big of a concern that it is and if it can be overcome. And then we go from there. So,
Nice. Nice.
I think that approach does translate to different verticals as well, right? And I love the categories they identified, specific or sales roles, but let's say I'm hiring for head of clinical operations or regulatory affairs or something that's completely outside of the cycle of the sales cycle, right? Is it logical that some of your elements may not translate? And then if so, which I'm assuming there would be, can you
mm,
speak to which ones actually may translate or maybe how a hiring manager, regardless of what vertical they're in, can think of creating a similar model for what applies to them, to their
mm,
team, to their vertical? How do you think
yeah.
about that?
No, absolutely. And I do think that the majority of the process that I've shared with you would translate to any position within any department of an organization. So not just sales, not just business development, not just the commercial side of things. The assessment would not. And the reason why I say that it is focused on weaknesses that impact sales individuals. So that would be the part that would need to be tweaked to the specific role, which again, if they're setting up and designing that ticket up front and really determining what their needle in a haystack candidate is, they know what they're going to want that person to do. So they don't necessarily need to build an assessment like what I've built. Again, I'm analytical. That's how I see the world. It works for my brain. But they should put something together to actually assess that individual's skill sets. And I mean, if it's a scientist, you may just be able to ask them questions about their research, their knowledge base, their academic background, things like that. If it's quality, you could get into their experience with kappas, if they've done anything with American Society for Quality, and so on and so on. So there are unique things to each position within each department that should absolutely be taken into account, and which, in my opinion, really would be that interchangeable piece of that you take out my assessment, you put in your own that's focused on the unique role, and everything else in the process, I think, works pretty much the same.
Sure. Sure. So we're getting close to the end of the episode. So we want to close with a few rapid fire questions. So
Okay.
don't think too hard about it. But yeah, so just interested in your in your response. So one mistake biotech hiring managers make when hiring commercial leaders is
Not being prepared with as far as what who they want to bring in based on what they need to accomplish.
So, in a few of our podcast episodes, we provide checklists of sort. So, frameworks of thinking, downloadable, concrete tools that the hiring manager, HR's leaders can use immediately.
Mhm.
So, what's something that biotech sales leaders can implement tomorrow to reduce subjectivity in sales hiring? Is it this? Is there a lower version of this? What do you think that somebody can implement tomorrow?
Yeah, and obviously I'm a little biased, but I have had a significant amount of success with the model with my assessment. And like I mentioned, I am making the assessment available in its entirety, as well as providing examples of it in my new book that'll be coming out next month as well. So that anyone can pick it up. They could put it into place. That may not be today, um, but essentially for a today thing, really just making sure that you're trying to bring in some way to better compare and contrast candidates because you're going to be interviewing multiple candidates for the same role. Um, so, how are you going to compare them? And you should make it as standard and as structured as possible so that it's not just all about that feeling that you get in your belly, that gut check type thing. So any subjectivity you can get out of the process to standardize it, that's what you should look at immediately. Your guys' checklists, I've looked at them; they're fantastic. The only thing I would say on those is that you should take them and modify them to align with your specific company, your specific hiring roles. But other than that, it's an amazing foundation and tool that you've put out there for people.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, sounds like you've honed this pretty well. You've worked with it over years, and pretty happy about where it is and its structure. And Marina, what are your thoughts on structure?
Well, honestly, when it comes to structure, we're really not talking about building something rigid, right? Because we don't think that structure um, is one of those things that has to be built in stone. And it honestly does not eliminate judgment either, right? It disciplines it. So that's how I think about it. If you're hiring commercial talent in biotech, the question isn't whether someone can perform in an interview, just like we talked about earlier, right? It's whether you've built a system that makes the interview criteria something that's measurable, right? And hints at future performance. Predictably correctly, right? Like, is that
Yep.
how we should understand it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with what you just kind of explained from that standpoint. Yeah, you are looking for, I mean, if you've clearly defined the outcomes that you want this person to achieve up front, then yes, everything you're doing is measuring their ability to achieve those outcomes. So that's where my process comes into play. That's where the assessment comes into play. Um, yes, 100% agree with you. You need to assess their ability to achieve the outcomes you're trying to achieve. So how do you do that in a disciplined way?
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Well, Aaron, thank you. This was thoughtful, analytical, and practical. So I think exactly what we're trying to have resonate with our with our audience.
No, perfect. I
Yeah.
appreciate the conversation, the opportunity to join you today. Great discussion. Absolutely.
And so once again, thanks for joining us. You have a book that is out for purchase called Infinite Positivity, and are launching your new book, Beyond Infinite Positivity. Where can we find that, and how can people contact you?
Yeah, both are available on Amazon. At least Infinite Positivity is. Beyond Infinite Positivity will be available on Amazon on the 24th of March. So not too far from now. Just putting the finishing touches on it right now. My email address is literally in the book because I offer to help people to understand the model, to implement the model, to use the model. So they can reach me there. You can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. I'm here, happy to help whoever and however I can at any point in time.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to have some of your contact details in the show notes. But
Perfect.
well, thanks again to our audience for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.